One of the main themes that I've come across in my researching of history is that there seems to be a common underlying, almost ubiquitous understanding of the gods across multiple cultures throughout antiquity, which I'm finding increasingly fascinating. This idea that all these diverse peoples from all these different time periods recorded in history seem to have a very similar understanding of the gods. But even more interesting is when you look at the presentation, the iconography, and the stories associated with these gods, we find a very specific presentation. They seem to have a serpentine characteristic, more appropriately, a winged, feathered serpentine characteristic. This to me is beyond fascinating, and in some ways is almost mind-blowing. So I want to go into this a little bit. In particular, tonight I wanted to talk about the seraphim. Now, the seraphim have a particular association with a particular religious sect. But again, the characteristics presented seem to be common amongst various cultures throughout time. So let's get into it. The seraphim. First, you'll see the picture I have here. Notice the wings, multiple wings, the presentation of the eyes, a human-like face. The seraphim is a celestial or heavenly being associated in ancient Judaism. In Hebrew, the word seraph means burning and is used 7 times throughout the text of the Hebrew Bible as a noun, usually to denote serpent. Tradition places seraphim in the highest rank in the Christian angelology and in the 5th rank of 10 in the Jewish angel hierarchy. So what I'm saying here is, when you look at the angelic hierarchy associated with Christianity, and in particular the early writings of the Roman Catholic Church, we find that a winged serpent being is placed in the highest order of the angelic hierarchy. Now, that to me is significant, because when we often think of religion, in particular Judeo-Christianity, we have a certain understanding that was presented to us. It was kind of a, let's say, a postmodern understanding that we get through popular culture, media, Hollywood. Many of us have an understanding of gods, angels, who God is, and Jesus, and how everything's associated. But not many people understand that the highest order of angel in the Christian pantheon of angels is a winged, feathered, plumed serpent. Now, this to me is key, because as I'm going to show you, this understanding of winged, feathered gods is a near ubiquitous understanding of the deities presented throughout antiquity. So again, seraphim is the name of this class of angels, and seraphim literally means serpent. In non-biblical sources, they are sometimes called achiast or gezes, which means serpent or dragon. And that's what the Hellenistic Greeks referred to them as. So again, dragons, serpent. One of the main representations we find of this seraphim class of angels happens to be in the book of Isaiah, chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphims. Each one had 6 wings. With twain, which is 2, he covered his face, and with twain he covered his feet, and with twain did he fly. So right here in Isaiah, one of the 66 books of the accepted Bible, we have this presentation of the seraphim with 6 wings. Seraph literally means in Hebrew, serpent. We have a serpent with wings being presented in the main Bible as the highest order of angel. Let's continue. And one cried unto another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the posts of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. Then said I, Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For mine eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then flew one of the seraphims unto me, and this is Isaiah speaking of himself in this vision, having a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with the tongs from the altar. And he laid it upon my mouth and said, Lo, this has touched my lips, and thine iniquity is taken away, and thine sin is purged. Now that last part is basically outlining a purification ritual that this prophet Isaiah was undergoing from these flying serpent angels. Look, I went to catechism, Sunday school. I was an altar boy for many years and went to church. Not once did the priest tell me that the highest order of angels were flying serpents. Here is a reference to the seraphim in the book of Enoch. Now, Enoch, although it's not canonized as part of the 66 authorized books of the Bible, Enoch is considered one of the prime apocryphal texts that we find in the Judeo-Christian pantheon, and it is referenced multiple times throughout the Bible. And as we'll see here, the reference in Isaiah was predated here in the book of Enoch. Again, another association with the book of Enoch to the accepted Bible. So from Enoch, and the chapter was 21, of how the angels here left Enoch at the end of the 7th heaven and went away from him unseen. Quote, And the cherubim and seraphim standing about the throne, the 6-winged and many-eyed ones, do not depart, standing before the Lord's face, doing his will, and cover his whole throne, singing with gentle voice before the Lord's face, Holy, 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 Lord, ruler of Sabbath, heavens and earth are full of thy glory. So again, a mention by name of the seraphim in the book of Enoch. Now we know the book of Enoch presents us with an understanding of what's called the Watchers, or the 22 angels that fell from heaven and made a pact on Mount Hermon through their leader Samael to integrate with humanity. Here we are, the seraphim. And again, in the name itself, seraph means serpent, winged serpent. Now, I've talked previously about how these winged serpentine beings were represented through the multiple cultures of antiquity. Here's a reference to the seraphim and their connection to the earlier Egyptian culture. There is an emerging consensus that the motifs used to display seraphs had their original sources in the uraeus iconography. And you can see the picture here of the uraeus. The uraeus was used as a symbol of sovereignty, royalty, divinity, and divine authority. And later iconography showed them with wings. So again, these are Egyptian gods called uraei. Again, winged, feathered serpents, sometimes depicted with the head of men, just like the seraphim. So now we have evidence that the original Israelites considered as their highest order of angels, the ones that protected the throne room of the Almighty, as flying serpents. We have the flying serpents depicted with the Israelites. Again, a common presentation of the gods as these winged serpent beings. What I'm showing here is an image that kind of packages this understanding of how the serpent plays into an understanding of the various mystical writings throughout the world, and in particular, the winged serpent's association with mystical ascension. Another thing that I'm coming across as I delve more into esoteric history and mysticism is this idea that the religions, the cultures, and the deities that were presented to us through the religious texts of the Bible and other ancient cultures like the Vedic understandings, the Egyptian writings, and even the earlier Sumerian writings can be considered a representation of one's personal experience. Here is a point being made regarding the mystical ascension process and the winged serpent understanding. So this is a quote here from somebody named Dr. Edward Bynum. It says the uraeus from ancient Egypt or the kundalini from ancient India represents the medical caduceus that we see here in the present day, which is the two serpents spiraling 7 times up a pole until they reach the top, at which point they have wings and take flight. So again, more winged serpent presentation, but this time integrating it in the ascension process. Well, let's look at these images here. The ancient Egyptian uraeus from the staff of Osiris. Well, we know the importance of Osiris in the Egyptian writings. Osiris basically took over for Ra and was considered probably the highest of their gods at one point. Osiris was the father of Horus and the husband of Isis, which can be considered one of the early Trinity associations. Many associate Horus with the Christ archetype. So as we see, the uraeus on the staff of Urias shows these intertwined serpents. Notice also, as they ascend, they reach the pine cone. The pine cone can be considered an analogy to the pineal gland. Again, elucidating here the process of mystical ascension. Then again, in the center, you see the modern caduceus, which is the symbol of the American Medical Association, which we've all seen, whether or not you've noticed it. Spiraling 7 times, 2 serpents, reaching an apex where they are winged. And we can use that as an analogy of, again, ascension, flying, rising to a higher level of consciousness. And then again, you see the kundalini representation from the ancient Vedic understandings. 7 times. Well, we're given 7 chakras. 7 chakras from the base chakra up through the ascension, through the energetic body, into the enlightened state of the crown chakra. So again, winged serpents being represented throughout antiquity, multiple cultures, multiple religions, and again, associated with our own mystical bodies. When we examine the writings and understandings of the secret brotherhoods, the mystery schools, and their doctrines, whether it is the Hermetists with the Hermetic tradition, the Gnostics, the later Rosicrucians, and some of the offshoots like the Masons and the Theosophists, we see this understanding of ascension from the base up through the energetic body. So again, we see this common representation, but it always has a serpent associated with it. Here, to continue with that understanding, we see the ancient Mayan representation of their god, Kukulkan. Now, Kukulkan is literally translated as plumed serpent or amazing serpent. Plumed merely means feathered. And again, it's the serpent deity of the Maya mythology. So again, now a completely diverse geography on the other side of the earth, across an ocean, we find that their main deity is a flying serpent, this one named Kukulkan. And you can see the images represented here, sometimes again represented with the face of a man. Also, you'll notice the Aztec god of Quetzalcoatl, again literally translated as feathered serpent. Among the Aztecs, he was related to the wind, Venus, the sun, merchants, arts, crafts, knowledge, and understanding, and learning. Well, what do we say when we talk about the Masons, their belief in their lineage, their belief in their genetic line? They feel as though their genetic line can be traced back to the fallen DNA that was basically given through Eve onto Cain. The descendant of Cain, his grandson, was named Tubal-Cain. He was considered the first blacksmith, basically the first mason. He started the great work of the mystery schools. Their belief is that their genetics are connected to these fallen serpent beings that may have indeed perpetuated their genetics through a particular line of mankind. Again, more associated with the line of Cain, as opposed to the line of Seth, which is typically connected to the line of the Israelites, and the seed of Adam. The idea here would be that Cain was not of Adam's seed, and that the story of the fall of man is more of an analogy regarding the sexual intercourse between the serpent in the garden and Eve. So again, we find in not only the multiple religions that have been presented to us, their stories, their scriptures, but even in the secret occulted understandings of the ruling class that apparently has been sitting near the top of the pyramid for hundreds, if not thousands of years. This idea as the gods being associated with flying serpents, and a narrative that these serpentine gods in some way mixed their genetics with humanity. It's told even in the book of Genesis that the sons of God laid with the daughters of man and created these mighty men of renown. So that's brought to us from the accepted Bible. Again, we can look at Enoch. I presented earlier that these winged serpents were represented by name as seraphim in Enoch. So the idea of this serpent, these flying serpent deities, cannot be overlooked and cannot be ignored when we are investigating history, whether it's common history, whether it's esoteric history, occulted history. There seems to be an underlying presentation. Now, Let's juxtapose that with the understanding of, let's say, the current royalty that we see in Eurasia over the last 500 years. This understanding of a particular line of quote unquote blue bloods that may have descended from the line of Canaan. Is it possible that to this day, the ruling elite class, the so-called royalty, still carries some vestige of this serpentine DNA? Are the stories that were given to us by like David Icke and others legitimized by this look into the gods of antiquity? This is an understanding that most probably are not able to handle, but it begs the question, why were these gods even represented in the 66 books of the Bible that were given to us? The seraphim are even represented in Revelation. I just didn't put it here. They're also found in the Gnostic Gospels. So this is mind-blowing for so many reasons, and it begs the question, why is this not given to us in our typical presentation of Christianity? And it goes to my fundamental precept regarding Christianity, is that we're giving a milquetoast, homogenized, whitewashed version of Christianity throughout the current major sects of the religion, and even more so with the Roman Catholic Church. We're given a version that's very different than the ancient scriptures on which they are based. And it begs the question, why? What are they hiding? Are there more than one genetic lineage associated with humanity? What is the true line of the Christ figure? And how does it all relate? You can even find references in Gnosticism to the snake knowledge. One of the main scriptures associated with the Gnostic tradition is called the Nag Hammadi Codices. Naga literally means snake. If you look in the Vedic culture of the, let's say, Far East, you find there is a religious group called the Nagas, which again means snake. There's an understanding that all of modern society and modern culture actually stemmed from the Central Americas, not the Mesopotamia region, not the Fertile Crescent, but indeed that after the fall of the so-called Atlantean culture, the vestige reestablished themselves in the Central Americas with the Mayas. Can these flying serpent gods be traced to the pre-Diluvian, pre-flood era? Were these the beings that were ruling during that time? And are we seeing this presentation in the various religions of these gods here as the gods of old? This is a very, very deep subject, and it ties in with understandings of the dragon and how that relates to the cultures of the Far East, and even the presentation of the Yahweh or Jehovah deity held up by the Judeo-Christian and Muslim religions can be seen depicted as a dragon-like being in certain scriptures.